Already. New paddock on my wrist, yeah. White diamond and them shits in pink, yeah. Got coin to go get a mink, yeah. New finger ring sit like a sink, yeah. You a bad bitch, then we can.
What is going on, YouTube? It's been a while. It's January right now, and as you can see, the bike's all torn apart. And if you know me well, you've known me for a while, you know what that means. It's bike build time. So, in the next few videos up on YouTube, I'm going to be going in depth on how to rebuild this motor. So why I'm going to do an in-depth video tutorial on how to rebuild this is I've looked for like a year on YouTube videos on how to rebuild this motor and I can't find one. So for any like just garage like weekend warrior and like just wants to do this type of like motor rebuild stuff by themselves, not paying somebody to do it, figured making this YouTube tutorial series is definitely going to help some people out. So let's get to it. Alright, so before you attempt to do this yourself, I have already done the top end on this motor, and I've done a lot of other 4-stroke motors and 2-stroke motors, bottom and top rebuilds, so I know what I'm doing, but for somebody new, these are the things that you're going to want. So first off, you want a nice big work surface. You don't need all the tools behind it or anything. You don't need like a big toolbox, but just have a nice clean flat work surface. So number 2, you want to have the service, or this is the owner's manual. For the service manual, now this will tell you all like the specs, the measurements, all that type of stuff, but for the actual service stuff, what I have here is I have my computer, and so I didn't have to go out and buy it. I just downloaded a manual. So I will leave this link in the description. It's free, it's online, nice and easy, and this just goes a lot more in depth about the motor. So number 3, you want a nice clean, I like to have a white surface to put all the parts that you take off the motor, put it down so you don't lose track of it. And another helpful thing to do is to label all of the bolts. So these are all the bolts from the frame, the subframe, the motor mounts, coolant, and linkages also right there as well. So once you have all of that stuff like done, you got a nice clean work surface, you got the owner's manual, the service manual online, all that type of stuff. Now for tools. Tools, as you can see here, I have all the metric wrenches. Again, you don't need it like right here, but like you should have a nice set of wrenches. Screwdrivers. These will definitely come in handy. Good set of snap ring pliers are definitely good to have. And a mallet. So when you do want to split the cases, or if you have like the cylinder or the head that doesn't really want to come off, having one of these is nice. Do not use a metal hammer. Always use a rubber mallet. All right, and now to sockets. So I have a lot of metric sockets, so you probably only need like one of these for rebuilding one of these motors. But definitely get like a good wrench. I have impact guns, but you don't want to always use those on that because that's how you end up like snapping bolts, stripping bolts. It's just not fun. But and also get yourself a good torque wrench. This is one that I got at Lowe's a few years ago. It doesn't go all the way down to like 5 foot-pounds or 10 foot-pounds. It only goes down to I think 20 or 30, but it's still pretty good, and it's gotten to the point to where I just know the feel of the torque on the bolts, so I only use that on like axle nuts and more of the big stuff on the frame. Alright, so I'm going to start getting into what I usually do on this thing to rebuild it, and I'm just going to set up a time lapse, and I'll probably stop it and kind of go more in depth when something cool is happening, I guess. So before you really start getting to disassemble the head and the cylinder, the piston, all that stuff, I usually like to check my valve clearances first. So if I do need to shim them, I already know beforehand, before like when I put this thing all back together, and then I go to start it up, doesn't want to run right, or if I check it after the fact, then it is just like more annoying. So instead I check it now, and then if I do need shims, I know what shims I need to order, and then I can order that all right at the same time when I order all the rest of the parts for this thing. So to check the timing on this this motor, see the little white dot there? There's another one on this cam gear. Where is it? Anyways, oh yeah, right there. Right tucked back in there. Anyway, so when those line up in the middle, the lobes will not be exactly at the same height. On Cowies and Yamahas, all the Jap bikes, that's how it is. KTM's, it's not like that. They basically, when those two dots are lined up, that means that it's at top dead center, and these cam lobes will be pointing like, not like, it'll be like, one would be like this, and then the other one would be like pointing straight up. It's not like timing a normal Japanese dirt bike. Take off this flywheel bolt cover. Okay, so now that you have that plug out, see a bolt right there. That should be a 14 millimeter. What you're going to want to do is put a socket wrench on that 14 millimeter socket, and turn that nut until these two marks line up. Okay, so I just did that really quick. 14 millimeter on this, turned it, and as you can see now, those two paint marks are lined up. And like I was saying, the lobes are not usually on Japanese and Honda motors. They're usually pointing directly at each other, or they're pointing outwards at the same level. So you can see here, this one's lower than that one, and these marks are lined up. So this is just how these KTMs are. Don't really know why, but that's how it is. Okay, so now what you're going to want to do is you want to go into your owner's manual. Flip back here. Right here, it'll have valve clearance. So this is a 2017 and a half factory edition. Same as like the 2018, 2017, pretty much all the KTMs from 16 up to 18. So intake is 0.10 to 0.15 millimeters. And then exhaust is 0.13 to 0.18 millimeters. So to measure that, you take feeler gauges. I usually like to go right in the middle, so I'll probably go like 0.12, and then for this one I'll probably go 0.15. And you check both valves, intake and exhaust, and then you write that down on a piece of paper. Alright, so I just checked all these real quick, and I obviously can see I checked the valves not too long ago, so I figured they weren't out of spec, which they're not. They are good. So, but for somebody that hasn't done this before, what you want to feel when you put the feeler gauge in. So this is there's supposed to be a 0 there, but it's 0.152 millimeters. So for the exhaust, this would be right in the middle. So when you put this in there, should be able to go in pretty freely, and you want that nice little drag on it. You don't want it too much to where it's like you're yanking on it to get the thing out, but just like that, a little bit tight, but loose enough to where it'll fit in nicely. And that's the same on the other side as well. Nice and smooth. Okay, so once you've done that, it's time to take off this head. So first thing you want to do is you want to loosen up the cam chain. Now, usually on the stock KTM's that has a hydraulic cam chain tensioner. I ended up switching mine out about a year ago to this Nihilo manual. Really nice. It increased oil pressure up to the head, since the oil isn't having to go through here to make the cam tensioner work. So this thing came with a plug, and you just plugged off the oil port that went into here. But all in all, works really well. It was kind of cheap. I think it was only like 80 bucks. Yeah, so all you need to do with this one, back off this nut, and then you can just take a 6 millimeter open end wrench or a set of pliers, and you can just back that off, and that'll loosen up your cam chain. Oh, and you also need to take off this cam chain cover so that you can pop the cam chain off around these cams. Okay, so I did kind of forget that to get the cam chain actually out, just by loosening this thing, it didn't want to let it come off. So what I ended up doing was just popping off the rest of the bolts that holds the cams in place and just popping them out. It's pretty easy. You don't need to do any more disassembly unless you want to change your valves. But just to get this head off, this is all you need to do to like get to the studs and to get the actual thing off. So now just need to undo those 4 studs and this bolt up front. Okay, so as you can see there, I had a little trouble breaking these stud nuts off. So these have been on there for probably about a year now, and yeah, they're pretty tight. So all I had to do was just get out a nice pole right here. This is my breaker bar. I just put at the end of the ratchet and crack those things loose. So yeah, now it's time to get the head off. Alright, so came off pretty easily. Now here you have your cam chain guides. Cam chain right there. I'm also going to check and make sure this doesn't need to be replaced. It looks pretty good. All the chain looks not bad, or the teeth on the cam gears hit it. Doesn't look too worn. But the piston doesn't look too bad either. Pretty even burn. This bike did run off race gas for a little bit, and then I started just putting it back onto a normal 97 pump gas. But yeah, it looks pretty good. So another thing that you definitely should take note of is these dowel pins. There are some on the over here on the camshaft retainers. There's dowels below there, and you just want to always make sure you don't lose them, because like on these, the oil is pumped up through there, so you definitely don't want to lose those, because then you're gonna probably run into oil leaking into the cylinder, start burning oil, and it's just a big deal. So always make sure you know where these go. So next, take off the cylinder. Alright, so the cylinder came off easily again, and as you can see, there are dowels down here as well. And looking at the piston, not bad. I'm not seeing any blow-by, so it's more common on 2-strokes, but it can happen to 4-strokes if you have a bad ring. Yeah, it doesn't look too bad. A little bit of wear right there. That's pretty normal. Yeah, pretty happy with this. So cylinder looked good as well. And one thing that you're going to want to check out in the cylinder, put on under this light, you want to make sure those lines, if this thing focuses, it's called cross hatching, and you want to make sure that's not damaged. That's all in the nixle plating. So if you do have a chip, or that the cross hatching's really beaten up, or if there's any deep gouges, you're either gonna have to get a new cylinder or get it replated. So this cylinder, just looking at it, I did put my finger in there right when I took it off. I'm not feeling any deep gouges or grooves or chips or anything, so the cylinder probably just needs a quick hone and a new piston. Alright, so final step of taking apart this top end is just to get this piston off. And how you do that, if you don't know, is down in here. It's kind of a tight angle to get the camera in, but there's little C-clips on either side of the piston. So all I need to do is just take one of those off, pop that rod out, and the piston will just come right off. So as you can see there, this little thing was not that easy to get out, but after just a little bit picking at it with the pick, I was able to get it out. Also, never reuse these. You always want to get new ones. Obviously they come with a new piston, but if for some reason you want to take off the piston and reuse it, always get new C-clips. Because these, if you do reuse them, when you take them out, they could get a little bit warped or bent, and it'll just be way more of a chance of this thing popping out while the motor's running and then just destroying your cylinder. So always do not reuse these, get new ones. But another tip is always put paper towels. Now this motor, these cases will be getting split anyways because the crank's getting rebuilt, but if you were just doing a top end on your bike, always put a paper towel in there. Not only just to not lose these down there, because I've done it and it's a pain in the ass trying to get these things back out. You usually do have to end up splitting the cases, but anyways, yeah, and just to get dirt, debris, anything else, you just don't want to have that stuff getting dropped down in there. So yep, another little pro tip. All right, and just like that, top end is completely off. See, the piston is in very good shape. Some people will probably just throw another set of rings on there, and if you're just riding for fun, weekend warring it, I honestly probably would recommend that. But since I do race this pretty heavily, and I definitely do rev the hell out of this thing, and yeah, I mean, I definitely take care of it. Oil changes every race. But I just wanted to have, a little bit more peace of mind. And this thing does have 121 hours on it, even though it might not look like it, but it does. So, but the crank rod even feels good. Side to side play is okay. I'll take these out, show you the crank button. So when you're checking out a crank, it doesn't really matter if it's two-stroke or four-stroke. Side to side, a little bit, not a ton, but that's okay. But you really want to make sure it doesn't have this up and down. So I usually just put my finger in there and try to wiggle it up and down, and I'm not feeling anything. This thing seems really solid. See, that's side to side, that's fine. But I'm not feeling any. But yeah, so this thing probably will rebuild, but I'm honestly starting to second guess it, because in the owner's manual it does say at 100 hours rebuild this. But man, this thing really does feel perfect. But anyway, so yeah, so that'll probably complete this first video on rebuilding this motor in depth, taking it down and putting it back together. But so took me, I think, about 30 minutes to take this thing apart. If it does take you a while, don't worry. It's probably a good thing that it's taking you a while, just to make sure you don't make any mistakes, especially if this is your first time doing it. I cannot stress enough to just take your time, make sure everything's all organized, take pictures. Another very helpful thing is taking pictures along the way, so you remember where everything goes, and you can reference back to those later on when it's time to put it back together. Okay, so time to put the top end in. All right, so see here, the Vertex piston, very good brand. I already put the rings on. Use your piston pin. This is one of the circlips that comes with this. First step when I get this piston right, to make my life a lot easier trying to put the other circlip on the other end and that, what I do is I always put one in before I put the piston on. So as you can see, I already put one circlip in. It's all seated. And then after that, you put on the rings. So Vertex gives us a little diagram, which is kind of helpful. Just shows the oil rings and the compression rings and where they're supposed to be going. So for the oil rings, now I'm not ready to put the cylinder on yet, and this piston isn't even on the motor yet, but you want to put them at 180 degrees apart. So like the top ring might be over here and the bottom ring would be over here. So and the compression ring, you don't want basically you don't want any of the end gaps on the ring matching up with another ring end gap. So this one I'd probably put right in the middle. That's what I usually do. Just put the end of this compression ring right in the middle of these two. Alright, so it's time to put this on that crankshaft. And as you can see, I got it in. And when it does finally go into place, you definitely will know, because it'll definitely be kind of a loud click. And on this one, I actually had a pin that actually like fit itself inside the piston, so the thing can't rotate. But I mean, not saying this is normal, but on a lot of the other brands, you won't have a pin, so you'll actually be able to take like a pick and move the circlip around to make sure that it's seated. So somehow cut my finger. I don't know, I was bleeding actually quite a bit. But yeah, so this is in now, and another tip is to put some assembly lube on the end of the crank where this piston pin goes through, just to have a little bit of a lubrication, so when you do break this in, you're not running it dry, because dry motors are no good. Next step is just doing some prep work where the gasket's going to go for the cylinder, and prep the cylinder up. So I got this vapor honed. You can see it looks like brand new on the outside, and also was honed out on the inside. So yeah. Alright, so I just cleaned off the cylinder really good, and also blew it off, or blew all the ports out with air to make sure there's no particles in there. And now I'm ready to put the gasket on. So I just got this Tusk off-road complete top-end gasket kit. So this comes with all the gaskets you need and seals. So now, oh, another little tip: put a little bit of that assembly lube right on the bottom half, about halfway down on the cylinder. It'll just help to get the piston in the cylinder, because it is kind of a pain in the ass because you don't have a lot of room to work with. Alright, so let's get this gasket on and get the cylinder on. Well, that was not easy. I had some trouble with the rings. They just were, I wouldn't say loose, but they just were kind of hard to compress and get the cylinder on. I had to actually take it back off just to make sure everything was good. So everything's good. It's cylinder's on, and take a 14mm socket on the end of a wrench. We can move the piston up and down and make sure that it's moving freely. On the way back up, it usually likes to push up the cylinder. And the cam chain, you also don't want to get caught like it actually is right now. It's jammed up down there. So, but anyways, looking good. Now it's time just to clean up this area, and for the head here, I'm going to clean up the actual head of the motor. So clean up that and the valves, and yeah, finish slapping this thing back together. Okay, so what I did off camera was just put this head gasket on. So this Vertex, or no, sorry, this Tusk gasket kit came with like 3 gaskets. They're all pressed together, so don't try to just take one off, because it'll probably just destroy this and probably won't be able to use it. As you can see right here, this brass pin pressed together. So put that on, then I put the dowels in, and next step is to clean the head. So this I'm still going to clean a little bit more, but what I usually do to clean this is I just use brake cleaner, and on the drill here, the impact, I've got this nylon brush, which moves really fast, and I kind of just can just like rotate it around, and it'll clean up the carbon really good. So, anyways, let's get to it. After this is clean, I can put this on there and then put on the 4 stud nuts and torque them down. Okay, so as you can see, with just maybe like 3 minutes, this looks pretty dang clean. There's still a little bit of carbon buildup in there, but as long as you get the majority of it off, it's ready to go back on the bike. Another little tool that I used was this little wire brush right here. You don't want to really like go wicked hard at it, but yeah, it helped definitely. But then I just went back over it with this, and then cleaned up any of the excess carbon with some more brake cleaner on a paper towel. So, ready to go back on the bike. Alright, so the head is on. Another thing that I like to do with these cam chains, as long as you're not replacing it, or I guess you could do it even if you do, but they do come pre-lubed. I just put a little bit of a assembly lube on them, just to make it, you know, lubed, last a little longer. Alright, so now it's time to put on the head bolts. Another tip is when you're trying to get this cam chain through the head, use a magnet, and it'll make your life a lot easier. I just put on all the stud nuts, tighten them down. Now it's time to torque them. Also, when you do tighten them, just make sure you go in a crisscross pattern to make sure the head doesn't warp, or the cylinder. And then right here, this little 8mm nut goes in this little 8mm stud. There definitely are probably other ways to torque this, but for me, I just get it. I put some blue thread locker on it, and then just give it nice little. Once it's all the way seated, just a little extra little nudge on the wrench, and I haven't had a problem with that. Just because you can't really get a wrench or a torque wrench down in there, so just get that nice and tight by hand. But all these other stud bolts you do need to torque. Okay, and as you saw in that time lapse, so went around, torqued them all down to 7.5 foot-pounds, like it says in the manual. Right, where is it? It is right there. 7.4. I went 7.5, but yep. And I just threw some blue thread locker. Make sure you use blue and not red, because red you're gonna have to heat up, and it's just really hard to get off. So just make sure you use blue thread locker. But yep. So now on to put the cams in place and put the cam chain on. And all right, so the next step is, like I said earlier, put on the. All right, so to put on the put the cams back in. First thing I want to do is obviously clean the surface. I've already done that with brake cleaner. Now, right in here, you want to make sure there's no grooves or anything. There isn't on mine. So what I did is put a little bit of lube down, just to help right when the first start up, because the oil it won't come up just yet. It'll take a little bit for the oil pump to pump that oil up. But just put some lube in there, and make sure the cams are clean. And when you put them in, you want the timing marks to be right here. So when you put the whole top end together, like I did on mine, you want to make sure the motor's at top dead center. it just makes it a lot easier to do this when it's at top dead center, because if not, you'd have to go on this side, find the timing mark on the flywheel, and then just make sure it's at TDC before you put these in. Alright, so I'm going to set up the time lapse and get these in place. Alright, so just like that, cams are in place. Next step is just to put the cam cap on that holds these in place. There are some dowels, so just take note of that. And as you can see, paint marks are lined up, so this motor should be timed. Again, as long as the piston is at top dead center. So after you put that on, next step is you just need to tighten your cam chain tensioner if you have one like mine, which is a manual one. If you do still have the hydraulic one, all I need to do is just screw that back in, and it'll do it automatically for you. So let's put that top piece on. Okay, and just like that, all the bolts are in and torqued down to 7.5 foot-pounds, just like the head nuts, just like those. Again, make sure you do them in a crisscross pattern. And yeah, I just tightened up the cam chain, so nice and tight. So now the last step is to put the gasket on for the valve cover, and put the valve cover on. And there's only 3 bolts that hold that in place. Okay, and just like that, your top end is pretty much complete. Just make sure you don't over torque these bolts, because they're really easy to strip out, and if you're worried about that, just get them hand tight and make sure you put blue thread locker on, and you shouldn't have a problem. Now, in the manual, it doesn't tell you to put gasket maker underneath that valve cover gasket, but with these KTMs and Huskies, right around here on the corners, they love to leak. Even bikes with only like 30-50 hours on them, you'll already see oil starting to come down. And it's not major, it's not losing that much oil, but to stop that from happening, just put a little bit of gasket maker underneath that valve cover to get that really good seal. And you shouldn't have a problem with a leaky gasket. Last step is this gasket over here, right here. So this is your exhaust gasket. So all you need to do is just put that there and then screw on the exhaust flange right here. Okay, so this is the final step, top end rebuild, putting this exhaust flange gasket on. Let's get to it. Okay, and that's it. You are done with your top end. All I did with this was just clean the mating surface on the head itself and on the exhaust flange, put the new gasket in, and put some blue thread locker on the 2 8mm bolts, and put them in with the impact gun, and just gave them a little extra crank with the wrench, and it should be good to go. You don't really need to tighten these too much, but at the same time you don't want them to come out. So just, you know, get it tight, but just make sure you don't over torque it. And another thing, make sure that these holes for the exhaust springs are like this, not the other way, because if it was the other way, the springs would like be going like sideways down and then like going up. This is how it's supposed to be, just like this. Alright, and so now all I need to do is break in your bike. There's several different ways on how to do that. There are many videos on YouTube to explain the pros and cons of each, so you pick, and stay tuned for more how-tos on KTMs and possibly some more vlogs coming soon. Alright, please like and comment down below what you want to see next on the channel, and make sure you hit that big subscribe button. Peace.